In the unforgiving heart of the Montana Territory, where wealth is measured in cattle and power is wielded like a branding iron, a man with nothing but the dust on his boots arrives at the grandest ranch in the valley. Cole Garrett is a cowboy seeking honest work, his past hidden in the shadow of the mountains. He immediately catches the eye of Beatrice Vanderbilt, the railroad heiress, who owns everything and everyone around her. But Cole's gaze drifts past the diamonds and silk to a quiet servant girl in the corner, Rosalie Evans, a woman with nothing but her dignity. This is not a story about a cowboy choosing a woman. This is a story about a man choosing a soul, and the storm that follows when the wealthiest woman in the West is told no for the very first time. The Golden Spur Ranch was not a place one stumbled upon. It announced itself from miles away, a sprawling empire carved from the very heart of the Montana wilderness. Its white fences ran for what seemed an eternity stark against the deep green of the valley floor, and the main house, a 2-story behemoth of timber and stone, stood like a monarch surveying its kingdom. To a man on foot leading a tired horse with a worn-out saddle, it was both an insult and a promise. Cole Garrett felt the weight of both. The dust of 1,000 miles was caked into his denims and the lines around his pale blue eyes. He was lean not from want, but from a life of hard use, and he moved with a quiet economy that spoke of reserved strength. His horse Buck nudged his shoulder, and Cole gave the animal a reassuring pat. They had come here for a reason work. Honest work that would keep his hands busy and his mind from wandering back to the shadows he'd ridden so hard to outrun. As he approached the main yard, the clamor of the place rose to meet him, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the lowing of cattle, the shouts of men who belonged. A portly man with a florid face and a stained vest stepped out from a long, low bunkhouse, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes, small and shrewd, took in Cole's appearance from top to bottom. "Looking for something," the man grunted. His name was Hank the foreman, and his authority hung about him like the scent of cheap whiskey. Work Cole said, his voice a low baritone, raspy from the trail. "I can ride rope and mend a fence better than any man you've got." Hank spat a stream of tobacco juice near Cole's boot. Big words for a man with a starving horse. "We ain't taking on drifters." Before Cole could reply, a new voice, sharp and clear as crystal, cut through the air. "Hank, is there a problem?" They both turned. Standing on the wide veranda of the main house were 2 women. One was a vision of Eastern finery, her riding habit a deep emerald green that seemed impossibly vibrant in the dusty landscape. A small feathered hat was perched on her auburn hair, which was coiled in an elaborate style that defied the prairie wind. This was Beatrice Vanderbilt, daughter of the railroad, and cattle king Cornelius Vanderbilt. Her beauty was as formidable and polished as the brass fixtures on her father's private train car. Beside her, slightly in her shadow, was another woman. She wore a simple grey servant's dress, her brown hair pulled back in a neat, unadorned bun. She held a silver tray with a pitcher of lemonade, and her eyes were cast downward, as if studying the patterns in the wooden porch boards. Yet in the brief moment her gaze flickered up, Cole saw an intelligence and a quiet composure that the heiress, for all her splendor, lacked. Beatrice's eyes, the color of mossy agate, swept over Cole with a dismissive air. "What does this man want?" "Nothing, Miss Vanderbilt," Hank said quickly, his tone shifting from surly to sycophantic. "Just a drifter. I'm sending him on his way." "I'm not a drifter," Cole stated, his gaze meeting Beatrice's directly. The act of a simple ranch hand looking her in the eye was in itself an act of defiance. "I'm a man looking for a wage." Beatrice's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. She was accustomed to men fawning, stammering, or looking away. This man's steady, unimpressed gaze was a novelty. My father is not in the habit of hiring vagrants. We have the best hands in the territory. Then you should have room for one more, Cole replied, his tone even. A flicker of amusement, or perhaps irritation, crossed her face. She took a step forward to the edge of the veranda, looking down on him. "And what makes you think you're one of the best?" Cole didn't answer with words. He turned his head toward the large corral where several hands were struggling with a wild-eyed stallion, a magnificent beast of black muscle and fury. The horse had already thrown 2 riders, and was now rearing and bucking, scattering men like chickens. "I'll work a month for free," Cole said, his eyes still on the horse, "if I can't break that stallion before the sun sets." A murmur went through the assembled hands. Hank the foreman looked scandalized, but Beatrice Vanderbilt smiled. It was a slow, calculating smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. This was entertainment, a welcome diversion from the tedium of a frontier afternoon. It was a chance to see this arrogant stranger humiliated. "Very well," she declared, her voice carrying across the yard. "If you break him, you're hired. If you fail, you will walk out of this valley and never show your face here again." Hank gave him access to the corral. Hank grumbled, but obeyed. As Cole handed Buck's reins to a young stable boy, his eyes met the servant girl's for a fleeting second. She was watching him, not with the predatory curiosity of her mistress, but with a look of genuine concern. A small, almost imperceptible shake of her head warned him. It was a gesture that said, "This is a fool's game. Walk away." Cole gave her a slight nod in acknowledgement, a silent message that he understood the risk. But he couldn't walk away. Pride was sometimes the only currency a man like him had. He swung himself over the corral fence, his movements fluid and sure. The stallion snorted its eyes, rolling a picture of untamed power. The other cowboys backed away, leaning on the fence to watch the show. Cole didn't approach the horse immediately. He walked the perimeter, his body relaxed, speaking in a low, calm murmur. He wasn't trying to conquer the beast. He was introducing himself, letting the horse get his scent and the sound of his voice. From the veranda, Beatrice watched with a detached interest, as if observing a play for which she had already predicted the ending. "He's arrogant," she commented to the servant girl beside her. "He'll be lucky to leave with his bones intact." The servant girl, Rosalie Evans, said nothing, but her hands tightened on the silver tray. She watched Cole's patient, methodical approach, so different from the brute force the other hands had used. She saw not arrogance, but a quiet confidence, a deep understanding of the animal he was facing. After several long minutes, Cole approached the stallion, not from the front, but from the side, extending a hand slowly. The horse shied, but didn't bolt. Cole continued to speak, his voice a steady drone. Finally, he was close enough to touch the horse's neck. A collective breath was held by the onlookers. He stroked the stallion's powerful muscles, his touch firm but gentle. The process was slow, a dance of patience and will. He introduced a blanket, then a saddle, retreating whenever the horse showed true fear, advancing when it showed acceptance. It took the better part of an hour. Hank was growing impatient, and Beatrice was beginning to look bored. "Enough of this circus," she called out. "Ride him or admit defeat." Cole ignored her. His focus was entirely on the animal. When he felt the moment was right, he gathered the reins, placed a hand on the saddle horn, and swung himself up. The world exploded. The stallion erupted into a frenzy of bucking, twisting and leaping that would have unseated any ordinary rider. But Cole moved with the horse, an extension of its wild energy. His body was a study in controlled grace, absorbing each violent jolt, his legs clamped tight, his free hand in the air for balance. The dust churned, the crowd shouted, but Cole was in a silent world, a contest between his will and the horse's spirit. For 5 solid minutes, the battle raged. The stallion used every trick it knew, but the man on its back was immovable. Finally, with a great shuddering sigh, the horse gave in. It stopped bucking its sides, heaving its head low. Cole sat tall in the saddle, patting its sweat-slicked neck. He hadn't broken the horse's spirit, merely its resistance. He had earned its respect. A stunned silence fell over the yard, broken by a few reluctant cheers from the ranch hands. Cole dismounted, giving the horse a final reassuring pat before turning to face the veranda. Beatrice Vanderbilt was no longer smiling. Her face was a mask of cold fury and something else, something akin to grudging respect. She had set a test she expected him to fail to provide her with a moment's amusement. Instead, he had succeeded, and in doing so, had won the admiration of her men. He had, in his own quiet way, challenged her authority. "Hank," she said, her voice tight. "Find him a bunk. He works for free for the first month, as agreed." She turned on her heel and swept back into the house without another word. As she passed Rosalie, she snapped, "The lemonade is warm. Bring a fresh pitcher." Rosalie nodded, her expression unreadable. But as she turned to follow her mistress, her eyes met Cole's one last time across the dusty yard. This time there was no warning in her gaze. There was a glimmer of something else, something he couldn't quite name, but it felt more valuable than any wage. It felt like understanding. Cole Garrett had found his work. But as he looked from the grand house, where the heiress fumed to the quiet servant girl who disappeared inside, he had a feeling he'd found a great deal more trouble than that. The first month at the Golden Spur was a trial by fire. Hank the foreman, still smarting from being overruled by a drifter, made sure Cole Garrett earned his keep. He was assigned the worst jobs, breaking the most stubborn horses, riding the farthest fence lines in the blistering heat, and taking the night watch during a week of thunderstorms that sent cattle scattering in every direction. Through it all, Cole worked without complaint. He rose before the sun was the last to turn in, and did his work with a quiet competence that slowly but surely turned the other hand's skepticism into respect. They saw he wasn't a braggart. He was simply good at what he did. His past was a closed book, and he offered no details when prodded, but his skill with a rope and his uncanny sense of the land spoke for him. Beatrice Vanderbilt, however, was not so easily won over. She observed him from a distance, her displeasure a palpable thing. He was a stone in her shoe, a constant reminder of the day her authority had been publicly tested and found wanting. She was used to being the center of her universe, the sun around which all other bodies orbited. Cole, however, seemed to exist in his own gravitational field. He treated her with a detached professional courtesy that she found more insulting than open hostility. He tipped his hat when she passed, answered her questions with a clipped, "Ma'am?" But his eyes never lingered. They held no admiration, no desire, no fear. It was as if he were looking right through her at the mountains beyond. Determined to provoke a reaction, she began to find reasons to interact with him. She would ride out to the far pastures where he was working, ostensibly to inspect the herd, her expensive English saddle and perfectly tailored habit, a stark contrast to his rugged practicality. "The herd seems thin in this section," Garrett, she'd say, her voice carrying a critical edge. "They're grazing the high ground, ma'am," he'd reply, not looking up from mending a stretch of wire fence. "Better grass after the rains. I pay you to keep the cattle where I can see them, not for them to go on a holiday. I'm paid to keep them healthy," he'd counter, his tone unruffled. "Healthy cattle fetch a better price in Miles City." His simple, irrefutable logic infuriated her. She tried a different tack, shifting from imperious employer to alluring woman. One afternoon she, accidentally, dropped her silk handkerchief near where he was reshoeing a horse. Any other man on the ranch would have scrambled to retrieve it. Cole merely glanced at it, lying in the dust. "You dropped something, ma'am?" She waited her smile tight. He went back to his work. With a frustrated sigh, she dismounted and picked it up herself. Her cheeks flushed with indignation. His refusal to play her games was a declaration of independence she could not tolerate. Cole, for his part, was not oblivious to her efforts. He was simply uninterested. He had known women like Beatrice before, women who saw people as possessions, who used their beauty and wealth as weapons. His past had taught him the danger of such entanglements. Peace for him was a fragile thing, and he guarded it fiercely. His peace was found not in the grand house or its dazzling mistress, but in the quiet corners of the ranch, and increasingly in the fleeting presence of Rosalie Evans. He saw her moving silently through the chaos of the ranch, carrying laundry from the bunkhouse, tending the small vegetable garden behind the cookhouse, her hands always busy. Unlike her mistress, Rosalie's gaze was direct and observant. She saw everything: the cowhand who was drinking too much, the lame horse trying to hide its injury, the subtle shift in the foreman's mood. Their first real conversation happened a week into his employment. He was sitting on an upturned bucket by the well at dusk, cleaning his saddle leathers when she approached to draw water for the kitchen. "That was a fine piece of riding," she said softly, her voice, the first thing he'd heard from her. "The day you arrived." Cole looked up, surprised. The horse did most of the work. "I just hung on." A small smile touched her lips. "You do yourself a disservice. You understood the animal. You didn't try to break its spirit." He stopped his work, intrigued. "Most people just see the fight. They see what they want to see," she replied, her hands working the pump handle with practiced ease. Miss Vanderbilt saw a challenge to her authority. The hands saw a show. "I saw a conversation between a man and a horse." He looked at her, then truly looked at her. Her face was plain in the fading light with a smattering of freckles across her nose, but her eyes were remarkably expressive, a deep, thoughtful brown. There was a stillness about her, a self-possession that he recognized because it was a quality he aspired to himself. "My name is Cole Garrett. I know," she said, hoisting the heavy buckets. "I'm Rosalie Evans." After that, their encounters became a small, unspoken ritual. He would often find a reason to be near the cookhouse in the late evenings, and she would sometimes bring out a plate of leftover biscuits or a cup of coffee. They talked of simple things: the weather, the cattle, the changing of the seasons. But in these simple conversations they learned the shape of each other's lives. He learned she was an orphan from Missouri who had worked since she was 12, sending most of her meager wages back to pay for her younger brother's boarding at a church school. She was saving for the day she could bring him out west, and they could have a small place of their own. She in turn learned things about Cole that he didn't say aloud. She saw the way his hand sometimes drifted to the empty spot on his hip where a gun might have once hung. She noticed the faint, silvery scars on his knuckles and the haunted look that occasionally entered his eyes when he thought no one was watching. She didn't pry. She simply offered him a space of quiet acceptance, a respite from the judging eyes of the world. One evening, he found her sitting on a bench behind the garden, staring out at the vast, star-dusted sky. He sat down, a respectful distance away. "It's a big sky," he said. "Sometimes I think it's the only thing out here that doesn't belong to Mr. Vanderbilt," she mused. "It's the only thing that's truly free." He knew what she meant. They were both caught in the Vanderbilt orbit, subject to the whims of the wealthy and powerful. "Why do you stay?" he asked, genuinely curious. "A woman with your sense could find better work in town." She sighed, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. "For William. My brother. The school is expensive. The pay here is steady, even if..." even if the work is hard on the soul sometimes. Another year, maybe 2, and I'll have enough." She looked at him. "What about you? You don't seem the type to take orders for long, especially from the likes of Hank." Cole stared out into the darkness. "I'm just tired of moving. Thought I'd try staying put for a while, see if it fits." The unspoken part of his answer hung in the air between them. "I'm tired of running." Rosalie understood. She didn't need the details of his past to see the weight he carried. She saw the good man he was trying to be. Their quiet connection did not go unnoticed. Beatrice, with her sharp eyes, saw the way Cole's gaze would soften when he spoke to Rosalie, the way he would appear as if by magic whenever Rosalie was carrying something heavy. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Not only had this dusty cowboy ignored her, the most desirable woman in the territory, but he was showing interest in her servant. Her servant. The insult was profound. It wasn't jealousy for the man himself, not yet, but a furious, possessive pride. She saw it as an affront to her station, a judgment on her own worth. Her attempts to win Cole's attention became more overt, her dresses more elaborate, her laughter louder when he was near. But it was like throwing pebbles against a mountain. Cole's attention was fixed elsewhere, on the quiet girl with nothing but a dream for her brother, and a soul that seemed as wide and as free as the Montana sky. The lines were being drawn not in the dust of the corral, but in the complicated terrain of the human heart. And a storm was gathering, one that threatened to sweep away the fragile peace they had all tried to build. The autumn air grew crisp, and with it came a tension that settled over the golden spur like an early frost. The source was a plague as old as ranching itself, rustlers. Small groups of cattle began vanishing from the northern pastures, disappearing without a trace. It was slick, professional work. Fences weren't cut, they were dismantled and reassembled. The tracks were cleverly disguised. Cornelius Vanderbilt, a man who measured his life in head of cattle, was apoplectic. Bounties were posted, patrols were doubled, and a grim mood fell over the bunkhouse. Every shadow held a potential thief. It was during this time that Cole's value became undeniable. His uncanny ability to read the land, to spot a broken twig or a misplaced stone, made him the ranch's best tracker. He led long, grueling patrols, often spending days in the saddle. Hank the foreman had no choice but to rely on him, a fact that chafed the older man raw. Cole's authority grew not from a title, but from sheer competence, and the other hands began looking to him for direction. Cole's long absences were a strange kind of torture for both him and Rosalie. Their quiet evening conversations had become the anchor of his new life, a moment of peace in a world that had always been turbulent. For Rosalie, his presence was a silent affirmation that kindness and decency could exist even in the harsh hierarchy of the ranch. His absence left a void, filled only by the cloying presence of Beatrice and the growing atmosphere of suspicion. The pressure from the rustling brought another unwelcome change. A visitor arrived from the east, stepping off a private rail car, looking as though he'd just strolled out of a New York bank. His name was Lawrence Sterling. He was handsome in a polished, predatory way, with cold, calculating eyes and a smile that never seemed genuine. He was the son of Cornelius Vanderbilt's railroad partner, and it was an open secret that he was there to finalize the details of his arranged marriage to Beatrice. Lawrence assessed the situation at the ranch with the eye of a businessman, not a cattleman. He saw assets, liabilities, and opportunities. He immediately identified Cole Garrett as a liability. He saw the respect Cole commanded from the men. And more importantly, he saw the way Beatrice watched the cowboy, her frustration and fascination a volatile mix. But what he noticed most was the quiet, stolen glances between Cole and the servant girl Rosalie. to a man like Lawrence, who saw people as pawns, this was a weakness to be exploited. He oozed charm, complimenting Beatrice on her beauty, her father on his empire, and the ranch hands on their rugged fortitude. But his eyes missed nothing. He was a snake in the garden, and Rosalie, accustomed to being invisible, was perhaps the only one who saw him for what he was. One evening, Cole returned late from a fruitless 3-day patrol, weary to the bone. He'd found signs of the rustlers, a hidden camp long abandoned, but they were ghosts, always one step ahead. As he was unsaddling Buck in the stables, Rosalie appeared with a lantern and a tin of fresh coffee. The stable was their sanctuary, a place of quiet shadows, and the scent of hay away from the prying eyes of the main house. "You found nothing?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. He shook his head, taking the coffee with a grateful nod. "It's like they know our every move. They hit where we ain't, and they're gone before we get there." He took a long swallow of the hot liquid. "Something feels wrong about this, Rosalie. It's too clean." "Be careful, Cole," she whispered, her eyes wide in the lantern light. "This man, Mr. Sterling, he watches you. I can handle a man in a suit." Cole said, though, he appreciated the warning. "It's not his suit I'm worried about," she said. "It's his eyes. They're like a hawk's. He sees everything as either a meal or a threat." Her words proved prophetic sooner than either of them could have imagined. 2 nights later, Rosalie was tasked with bringing a tray of brandy and cigars to the study, where Cornelius Vanderbilt was meeting with Lawrence. The door was slightly ajar, and as she approached, she heard Lawrence's smooth, confident voice. "And that's the problem, Cornelius. Your operation is bleeding. These rustlers are making you look weak. Your buyers in Chicago are getting nervous. They hear whispers of instability." "Damn the whispers!" Vanderbilt's voice boomed. "I've built this empire with my bare hands. I'll see every last one of those thieves hanging from a cottonwood tree." "Of course," Lawrence said placatingly. "But vengeance doesn't recoup losses. The price of your stock is going to fall. Your grip on this territory is slipping." Rosalie froze her hand on the doorknob. This was not a conversation she was meant to hear. Lawrence's voice dropped lower, becoming more conspiratorial. "Let me help. My father and I can absorb the loss. We can offer you a generous price for a controlling interest in the ranch. Merge our assets. It will be seen as a sign of strength, a consolidation. It protects your family, secures Beatrice's future with me, and stops the bleeding before it becomes a hemorrhage." "Sell my ranch," Vanderbilt roared. "You want me to sell my kingdom because of a few dozen stolen cattle? Think of it as an investment in a more secure future," Lawrence purred. "As it is, the losses are mounting, and I suspect they will continue to mount until the situation becomes untenable for you to manage alone." A cold dread washed over Rosalie. The finality in Lawrence's tone, the subtle threat beneath the smooth words. It wasn't a business proposal. It was an ultimatum. But it was the next voice that chilled her to the bone. A third man was in the room, someone she hadn't realized was there. His voice was gravelly and low. "The next herd goes tomorrow night, the West Fork of the river. The new man, Garrett, is scheduled to be on patrol on the South Ridge. He'll be miles away." Rosalie recognized the voice. It was a ranch hand named Brody, a surly man who kept to himself. She had seen him speaking with Lawrence near the stables earlier that day. An inside job. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The rustling wasn't random. It was a manufactured crisis orchestrated by Lawrence Sterling to devalue the Golden Spur, to force Cornelius Vanderbilt's hand, and to seize control of the entire valley. And Cole was being deliberately sent in the wrong direction. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She backed away from the door, silent as a ghost, the tray rattling faintly in her trembling hands. She had to warn Cole. But how she was a servant, a nobody. Brody was a paid hand. Lawrence Sterling was about to become the boss's son-in-law. It would be her word against theirs. Accusing them would be professional suicide, if not worse. Lawrence was not a man who would tolerate being crossed. She hurried back toward the kitchen, her mind racing. She was trapped. She held a secret that could save the ranch, that could save Cole from riding into a setup, but the secret itself was a weapon that could destroy her. For the first time in her life, Rosalie Evans understood the terrifying weight of knowledge. In the Wild West, a whispered secret could be as deadly as a loaded gun. Beatrice Vanderbilt felt the walls of her life closing in. The arrival of Lawrence Sterling, so eagerly anticipated by her father, felt to her like the arrival of the jailer. Lawrence was handsome, wealthy, and impeccably mannered, the perfect match on paper. But when he looked at her, she felt like one of her father's prize heifers being appraised before auction. He spoke of their future as a merger of dynasties, a strategic alliance. There was no talk of affection, only of assets. His presence made Cole Garrett's indifference all the more galling. Lawrence represented the gilded cage. She was born into a world of calculated moves and loveless unions. Cole, with his quiet independence and refusal to be impressed by her wealth, represented a freedom she craved but could never possess. Her frustration simmered, and she decided on a reckless course of action. She needed to force a reaction from him, to break through his infuriating composure, even if it was a negative one. Anything was better than being ignored. "Garrett," she announced one morning, striding toward him as he prepared his horse for the day's patrol. "You'll be riding with me today. There's a new foal in the high meadows I wish to see." Cole paused, his hand on his saddle. "Mom Hank has me assigned to the South Ridge. There's rustler sign we've been tracking. Hank works for my father, and I am telling you that your duties have changed," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Get your things, and bring a canteen for me." It was a blatant power play, and they both knew it. To refuse would be direct insubordination. With a tight-lipped nod, Cole complied. An hour later they were riding out Beatrice on her elegant mare, and Cole following a few paces behind, on Buck, his face a stony mask. She led him deep into the rolling hills, far from the usual grazing lands, chattering about mindless gossip from back east, about parties in New York and dresses from Paris. Cole responded in monosyllables, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain, his instincts on high alert. Something felt wrong. This wasn't the way to any high meadow he knew. As the sun reached its zenith, she led them into a narrow box canyon. The walls rose steeply on three sides, a dead end of rock and scrub brush. She dismounted gracefully. "I think we'll rest here for lunch," she declared, untying a basket from her saddle that Cole hadn't noticed before. "This is a bad spot, Miss Vanderbilt." Cole said, his voice low and serious. He didn't dismount. Easy to get trapped in. "We should head back." "Nonsense," she scoffed, spreading a linen cloth on the ground. "It's perfectly safe. Stop being so grim and have some chicken." He knew then, with certainty, that this was a deliberate act. She had brought them here to manufacture a situation, to create an intimacy that couldn't be found in the bustling ranch yard. His jaw tightened. He had no interest in her games, especially with the rustler threat looming. "With all due respect, ma'am, my job is to look after the ranch's stock, not to have a picnic. We're leaving." His flat refusal stunned her. No one had ever spoken to her that way. "I am not finished with my ride. You will wait." "No, ma'am, I won't." He turned Buck's head, preparing to ride out. A sudden sharp cry from Beatrice stopped him. He whipped around to see her clutching her ankle, her face contorted in pain. "My ankle, I think I've twisted it." Cole's eyes narrowed. He dismounted, his movements stiff with suspicion. He walked over and knelt his examination of her ankle professional, and detached. He felt the bones, the tendons. There was no swelling, no heat, nothing to indicate a genuine injury. She was lying. He stood up, his face unreadable. "You can ride Miss Vanderbilt." Her mask of pain dissolved into fury. "How dare you? I am injured. You will help me back to the ranch, and you will do it now." "You're not injured," he said, his voice cold as river stone. "You're bored, and you're playing a dangerous game. This is cattle country, not your father's ballroom. A stunt like this could get us both killed." His raw, unvarnished honesty struck her harder than any insult. The truth of his words stripped away her pretense, leaving her exposed and humiliated. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a sudden, shocking vulnerability. Tears welled in her eyes. "You have no idea what my life is like," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You see the house, the dresses, the money. You don't see the cage. You don't see Lawrence Sterling and his ledgers where a heart should be. You don't see my father looking at me like I'm a prize bull to be sold to the highest bidder." She sank to the ground, her face in her hands, her sobs echoing in the silent canyon. I wanted one person to see me. Not the Vanderbilt name, not the inheritance, just me." Cole stood over her, a torrent of conflicting emotions warring within him. He saw the spoiled, manipulative heiress. But for the first time, he also saw a desperately lonely young woman trapped in a life she didn't choose. He felt an unwelcome flicker of sympathy. He had spent his life running from cages of his own making. He understood the feeling, if not the circumstances. He sighed, the sound heavy in the quiet air. He walked over to his horse, retrieved his canteen, and handed it to her. "Here," he said, his voice softer now. "Drink some water. We'll rest for a few minutes and then we'll ride back. Slowly." He didn't coddle her or offer false comfort. He offered a simple, practical kindness. For Beatrice, who was used to either fawning flattery or cold calculation, this small gesture of unadorned decency was more meaningful than 1,000 compliments. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Lawrence Sterling was putting his own plans into motion. With Cole conveniently out of the way on a fool's errand, with Beatrice, Lawrence rode out with Hank and a few other men to investigate a report of a broken fence. The report was, of course, false, planted by Lawrence himself. His real target was a loyal, aging ranch hand named Frank, a man who had been on the ranch for 20 years and was fiercely devoted to Cornelius Vanderbilt. Frank was a potential problem, a man who might question the narrative Lawrence was creating. When they reached the section of fence, Lawrence dismounted. After a few moments of searching, he called out, holding up a Vanderbilt-branded branding iron. "Well, well, what have we here? Looks like someone was planning a little rustling of their own." He then walked over to Frank's saddlebag, which was slung over the old man's horse, and pulled out a small pouch of gold coins. "And it looks like they've already been paid for their services." Frank's face went white with shock. "That's not mine. I've never seen that iron or that money in my life." "It's a setup." Hank looked confused, but Lawrence's expression was one of grim certainty. "A likely story. I've had my suspicions about you for weeks, Frank. You're getting old. Maybe you thought you were owed something more. Seize him." The other hands swayed by the planted evidence, and Lawrence's confident authority grabbed the protesting old man. They were good men, but they were not thinkers. They saw what they were shown. Lawrence watched a cold smile touching his lips. He had accomplished several things at once. He had created a scapegoat for the rustling, sowing further discord and mistrust among the hands. He had removed a loyal Vanderbilt man from the board, and he had demonstrated his own decisive leadership in the face of crisis. When Cole and Beatrice rode back into the yard hours later, they were met by a scene of controlled chaos. Frank was being held in the tack room, awaiting the sheriff from Prosperity Gulch, and Lawrence was on the veranda, calmly explaining to a thunderous Cornelius Vanderbilt how he had uncovered the traitor in their midst. Cole saw the scene, saw old Frank's terrified face, and his blood ran cold. He knew Frank. The man was as honest as the day is long. It didn't add up. He looked over at Beatrice. Her face was pale, her earlier emotional turmoil forgotten, replaced by confusion and alarm. She had spent the day playing a foolish game in a canyon trying to get a man's attention, while back at her home, a real and dangerous game was being played for the highest stakes imaginable. The gilded cage had just gotten a lot smaller, and the bars felt colder than ever. The air at the Golden Spur grew thick with poison. Frank's arrest cast a pall of suspicion over the entire bunkhouse. Men who had worked side by side for years now eyed each other with distrust. Lawrence Sterling moved through this atmosphere like a conquering hero, accepting Cornelius Vanderbilt's praise with feigned humility. He had found the source of their troubles, and the ranch owner, blinded by rage and relief, saw only what he wanted to see. Cole Garrett saw a lie. He knew Frank was innocent, which meant the real rustlers were still out there, and one of them was likely inside the ranch. His mind kept circling back to the sheer efficiency of the rustlers, their uncanny knowledge of the patrol schedules. It had to be an inside job, and Lawrence's convenient discovery of a scapegoat was too perfect. Rosalie, meanwhile, was burdened by her terrible secret. She knew the truth. She knew Lawrence was the architect of the ranch's woes, and that an innocent man was about to hang for it. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach. To speak out was to invite the wrath of a powerful and ruthless man. To stay silent was to condemn Frank and allow the deception to continue. Her conscience warred with her instinct for self-preservation. She had to tell Cole. He was the only one who might believe her, the only one with the courage to act. She waited for an opportunity, her nerves stretched thin. It came the following evening. Lawrence and the Vanderbilts were occupied with dinner, and the ranch hands were in the bunkhouse. Cole was in the stables, tending to Buck, his movements methodical and grim. The stable had become their unspoken meeting place, the one corner of the ranch that felt safe. Rosalie slipped in the lantern she carried, casting long, dancing shadows. "Cole," she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned, and the worried look on his face deepened when he saw her expression. "Rosalie, what is it?" "It's not Frank," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He didn't do it. It's Lawrence, Mr. Sterling. He's behind all of it." She recounted everything she had overheard outside the study, the conversation about devaluing the ranch, the mention of the hand Brody, the deliberate plan to send Cole to the South Ridge while they hit the West Fork. As she spoke, Cole's expression hardened from suspicion to cold certainty. Her words were the missing pieces to a puzzle he had been struggling to solve. "I saw him speaking with Brody again today," she added, her voice barely audible. "Behind the smokehouse, Lawrence passed him a small bag. I think he was paying him off." "Brody." Cole breathed the name, fitting perfectly. Brody was a quiet, sullen man who always seemed to have more money for whiskey than his wages allowed. "It makes sense, all of it." He looked at Rosalie, his admiration for her warring with his fear for her safety. "You took a great risk telling me this." "An innocent man is going to hang," she said simply, her resolve firming. "I couldn't live with that." But they were not alone. Lawrence Sterling, on his way to the stables to check on a new horse he'd acquired, had seen Rosalie slip inside, His suspicion piqued. He had approached silently, listening from the shadows near the wide-open door. He heard enough. He heard his name. He heard the word Brody. He heard the accusation. The servant girl knew, and she had told the one man on the ranch he couldn't control. He didn't storm in. A man like Lawrence never used brute force when surgical cruelty would suffice. He retreated as silently as he had come, his mind already formulating a plan. He had to discredit the source, to destroy Rosalie's credibility so utterly that no one would ever listen to a word she said again. The next morning, the ranch was awoken by a scream from the main house. It was Beatrice. Her bedroom had been robbed. A pearl necklace and a diamond bracelet gifts from her father were missing from her jewelry box. Cornelius Vanderbilt was enraged. He ordered every hand, every servant, every person on the ranch to be searched and questioned. Lawrence directed the search with grim efficiency. He insisted they start with the staff quarters, his face a mask of solemn concern. He led Hank himself to Rosalie's small, sparse room. It was barely a closet with a narrow cot, a small wooden chest for her belongings, and a single hook on the wall for her dress. Lawrence ran his hands over the thin mattress, opened the chest containing her few folded clothes. Then his hand went to the pocket of the spare apron hanging from the hook. His fingers closed around something hard and metallic. With a look of profound disappointment, he pulled out Beatrice's missing diamond bracelet. It glittered obscenely in the dim light of the small room. "I can't believe it," Lawrence said, his voice filled with sorrow. "The quiet ones are always the most deceitful." Rosalie, who had been brought to stand in the doorway, stared in horror. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. I've never seen that before in my life. I didn't take it." "The evidence suggests otherwise," Lawrence said coldly. Cole had pushed his way through the crowd of onlookers. He saw the bracelet in Lawrence's hand, saw the look of pure, manufactured triumph in his eyes, and the terrified disbelief on Rosalie's face. "She didn't do it," Cole said, his voice a low growl. He stepped forward, placing himself between Lawrence and Rosalie. "This is a lie." "A lie?" Lawrence chuckled a humorless sound. "The bracelet is in her room, Garrett. Are you suggesting I put it there?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting." Cole shot back, his eyes locked on Lawrence's. The challenge was unmistakable, a line drawn in the sand. Cornelius Vanderbilt pushed his way to the front. "Enough of this, Garrett. Stand down. The girl is a thief." "Sir," Cole said, his voice steady and respectful, but unyielding. "I've known Rosalie for months. Her character is beyond reproach. This is a setup. Frank's arrest was a setup. This is all being done to—" "To what?" Lawrence interrupted smoothly. "To what end, Garrett? What grand conspiracy have you invented? I am trying to protect this family while you are defending a common thief." The logic was on Lawrence's side. The evidence was there. Cole had nothing but his gut instinct and his faith in Rosalie. To everyone else, he looked like a fool or worse, an accomplice. "Lock her in the cellar storeroom," Vanderbilt commanded, his face purple with rage. "The sheriff is already on his way for Frank. He can take her too." Two ranch hands moved forward hesitantly. Rosalie looked at Cole, her eyes filled not with tears but with a desperate plea. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent promise that this was not over. They took her away, her small frame looking impossibly fragile between the two large men. Cole stood his ground, his fists clenched at his sides. He had stood up for her, and in doing so had declared himself an enemy of Lawrence Sterling, and by extension, Cornelius Vanderbilt. He had alienated himself from the very men who paid his wage. Beatrice watched the entire scene from the doorway of her room, the stolen pearl necklace clutched in her hand. She had seen the look in Lawrence's eyes as he found the bracelet. It was not a look of discovery. It was a look of victory. She remembered his cruelty, his coldness in the face of her manufactured tears in the canyon. She remembered Cole's simple, honest decency, and she remembered Rosalie's quiet dignity, her constant, unassuming kindness. A terrible doubt began to seed in her mind. Lawrence was her fiancé, the man her father had chosen. But Cole's unwavering defense of a powerless servant girl held a conviction that all of Lawrence's smooth words lacked. For the first time, Beatrice began to question the world her father had built and the man she was supposed to marry. She looked from Lawrence's smug face to Cole's defiant one, and a new, unfamiliar alliance began to form in her heart. Knowing Rosalie's fate rested on proof, not words. Cole Garrett moved as dusk fell. He cornered the turncoat ranch hand Brody, who was making a run for it. Cole's quiet intensity quickly broke the man who confessed the location of the rustlers' camp, a remote canyon called Devil's Basin. While Cole rode into the night, a newly awakened Beatrice Vanderbilt waged her own war. Driven by a gut feeling that Lawrence was lying, she broke into his private study. Prying open a locked desk drawer, she discovered his secret ledger, a cold, damning account of the entire conspiracy, detailing the stolen cattle and the payments made to orchestrate her father's ruin. Miles away, Cole used skill and shadow, not brute force, to infiltrate the rustlers' camp. He isolated and captured their leader, convincing the man that Lawrence would soon see him as a loose end to be eliminated. At dawn, Cole rode back into the ranch yard with his prisoner, just as the sheriff arrived. "Before you take an innocent woman," Cole's voice boomed, "hear what this man has to say. He works for Lawrence Sterling." Lawrence laughed, calling it a desperate lie, but his smirk vanished as Beatrice appeared on the veranda, holding up the ledger. "Then perhaps you can explain your accounting," Lawrence exposed, and trapped Lawrence's hand, darted for a hidden pistol, but a single warning shot from Cole splintered the post beside his head, ending the standoff in a deafening crack of truth. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Armed with the rustler's confession and Lawrence's own ledger, the sheriff clapped the disgraced financier in irons. A humbled Cornelius Vanderbilt watched in stony silence as the architect of his near ruin was led away, then immediately ordered Frank and Rosalie freed. As Rosalie emerged into the morning sun, her eyes met Cole's across the yard in a moment of profound, silent understanding. The Cattle King approached Cole, his pride finally broken. "Garrett, I was a fool. The foreman position is yours, and a reward that will make you a rich man." Cole looked from the powerful rancher to Rosalie, whose freedom was more valuable than any fortune. "Thank you, Mr. Vanderbilt, but I can't accept your reward." The crowd of hands murmured in disbelief. "All I ask," Cole continued, his voice steady, "is for Rosalie's freedom and her back pay. That is payment enough." Later that day, he found her by the garden she had so carefully tended. He held out his saved wages, a modest sum. "It's not much," he began, "but there's homestead land up north that doesn't belong to any king. I'm looking for a new horizon. Rosalie and I don't want to find it alone." He offered not a life of ease, but a partnership, a future they would build with their own hands. Rosalie's smile was brighter than the Montana sun. She placed her hand in his without a moment's hesitation. "I have never cared for diamonds, Cole. I will take the partner." From the veranda, Beatrice watched them, a new quiet wisdom in her eyes. She finally understood that true wealth was something money could not buy. 2 days later, Cole Garrett and Rosalie Evans rode north, leaving the world of dust and diamonds behind them for a horizon that was entirely their own. And so, the cowboy who saw past a fortune, and the servant girl who owned nothing but her own spirit, rode off to build a life on their own terms. Their story reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in gold, land, or titles, but in character, courage, and the freedom to love who you choose. It's a testament to the fact that integrity is a currency that can't be bought or sold, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in a mansion, but in a shared dream under a wide open sky. If this story of love, betrayal, and redemption in the Old West captured your heart, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know. Share this tale with someone who loves a good Western drama, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more stories that bring the frontier to life. Thank you for listening.